Hi, everyone. Welcome to Queer Lodgings, the queer-led podcast about everything Tolkien. I'm Grace, and I'm here with my co-host Leah.
Hey.
And Alicia.
Hello.
And our producer Tim.
Sup, Lodgers?
Thank you for joining us. Go ahead and settle into your chair with a bit of lembas spread or food concentrate. Food stuff with no chemical properties which could be discovered, which makes it superior to other cakes of wheatmeal. Refer to letter 210 for the punchline of that joke, because jokes are always best when they have to be researched. Because in this episode, we're talking about adaptations of Tolkien's works. In some ways, this is a very timely episode. In this year alone, we've gotten a second season of a big budget television show set in Middle-earth, new major film announcements with Peter Jackson attached. Jackson's Return of the King came back to movie theaters for a 20th anniversary screening within this past year. And there's an animated feature film coming to theaters this December, War of the Rohirrim. And we're talking about basically none of them.
Yep. Screw all those.
In this first episode on the topic of adaptations, we're not focusing on these projects with impressive scope and even more impressive budgets. We'll get there down the road, which goes ever on and on. But in this episode, we're focusing on the adaptations that came before them, that fewer people know about, remember, or have seen. There are actually more than 24 adaptations that fit that criteria, including those that never made it through production.
Wow.
So I just wanted to take a quick note here to sort of talk about the different sort of perspectives or attitudes that people take with regards to adaptation. I actually wrote a paper for MythCon this year on adaptational change, particularly as it pertains to the Fremen narrative in Dune Part 2, the Denis Villeneuve films, compared to the original book.
Nerd.
You say this on this fucking Tolkien podcast?
I was going to say.
Dune's a step fucking too far, man.
But I had this paragraph in that paper that I'm just going to read. So there are multiple schools of thought regarding adaptational change, particularly the extent to which an adaptational work should, quote unquote, remain true to its source material. Certain fans desire maximum fidelity to the source material down to minor plot points, while others see adaptation as an opportunity for a fully transformative work, departing significantly from the original, and some prefer a level of fidelity somewhere in between these extremes, more concerned with maintenance of the core themes and characterizations present in the primary work. So I have some idea, but maybe for our audience, each of us could talk a little bit about where we fall along that spectrum of like absolute fidelity to lore, whatever that means, versus fuck it, do whatever you want. Who wants to go first?
Okay, someone who does not have a kitten trying to nurse from their hand.
We're leaving that in.
Yeah. Roll.
I mean, I'll go first because I feel like I'm probably the most contentious person here. I am of two minds about adaptation. I either want it to stick as close to the actual story as possible and be like a faithful adaptation. So I'm thinking like 80 to 85%. Like I understand some changes need to be made and some changes need to be made that will actually make the story better. Or I want it to be batshit crazy, but funny. Whether it's intentionally funny or not, because some of my favorite adaptations, I mean, it's like the Muppet adaptation school of thought, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, I want it to either try to be faithful or I want fucking Statler and Waldorf. Like,
yeah,
that's what I want.
I think I fall towards that end of the spectrum more often than not. I'm definitely somewhere in the fuck it, do what you want kind of school of thought. I think part of it is because I went to film school and kind of lost my mind, and I was kind of like, yeah, adapting shit is really hard. And also like trying to please a lot of people, most of which are not fans or necessarily like fans of the original source material, but pleasing the people who are paying you and all of your peers, and how you kind of need to balance making them happy with keeping fans happy, I guess, has really kind of come to inform a lot of my thoughts. I definitely used to fall when I was younger, I definitely was more of like a stickler and kind of being a lot more upset about changes from certain things. These days, I'm very much more, like, oh hey, yeah, hell yeah, that's a wild choice to make, or that's a fun choice to make, or like, oh yeah, I get that, I get why they did that. I don't know. I guess I'm a lot more, again, I feel like I've lost my mind to a degree. So some of this is me sort of like, like, fuck it, whatever, man. Do what you want.
Yeah, I tend to enjoy a very faithful adaptation, except when there are times when that is not a good choice. Like, it's not a good choice to keep in something which no longer fits the spirit of the work, or it's not a good choice to keep in something that is simply doesn't translate to the medium that you're trying to bring something into. And I think the tone of a piece matters to me too. So if it's a very serious adaptation in tone, I'm going to want to see it be pretty faithful. If it's lighter and looser and supposed to be having fun, like, I enjoy those sort of more wild and crazy out there, like, hey, we went a weird place with it, but we actually connected to the core of the work. And I think what matters to me the most is that I can see where an adaptation is going back to the core of the work. I want to be able to see, even if we make a completely different choice, why that choice was made, why it makes sense, what purpose it serves. And if none of that is apparent, I'm going to be annoyed.
Totally valid. Totally valid.
I think I come from a similar place in that I really do like to see the core themes pulled through from the source material. But besides that, I'm pretty open to significant changes being made, especially if those are changes that I'll say sort of update the work, bring it into a
Mm.
more modern sort of modern context kind of thing. I'm not talking about like, taking a historical work and setting it in the present day, but just like bringing in some of the zeitgeist and stuff that's happening in the world at the moment and sort of blending that with the core source material itself. There's probably a few things that I have, like stories I hold very close to my heart, that are probably mostly comic books, that I would be like, I would like to see 100% faithful adaptation of this.
Mm.
And that probably has to do something with the fact that comics are already a visual medium. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's already a visual piece and even like framings and stuff like that to inform the filmed adaptation. But with books, I text based, entirely text based stories, I'm pretty open to making significant departures from the original text. Part of me says that because I've seen some adaptations where they've tried to stay very faithful to the original text that have ended up being absolute fucking hot trash.
I think I've seen those movies too.
So if it's a choice between an adaptation that tries to stick way too close to the books and the pacing just doesn't work when you adapt it to a screen or something like that, or there are elements that you just can't film because they would be too brutal or gory or something to actually see portrayed on a screen, then I'm fine with there being significant departures from the source material.
I think also just things like if the tone of the adaptation is not one that lends itself to overarching narration, but the book itself had a lot of like character thoughts
Mhm.
instead of dialogue, putting that narration in there makes for a really shitty adaptation in a visual medium or whatever. So I want the adaptations to be responsive to not just the source material, but to the audience that they're working with and reaching toward.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's also a lot of things that you can read on a page and understand what's happening, but I'm thinking things in terms of like magic or whatever. Like I can read on the page that magic is happening and so is conjuring whatever spell or exerting whatever magical influence over this character, where you can't just show that on screen without some sort of visual shorthand or visual
Mhm.
or audio sort of shorthand. And that is an adaptational choice, right? Is how you depict that and how you bring that thing that is clear to a reader reading the words on the page, but would not be clear if you just tried to show a character thinking really hard at another character or something like that, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like an internal sort of experience of a
mhm.
character, that a character sort of like sorting through their own thoughts or kind of reflecting about, like, it's like if you were to directly translate that to the screen. You just have a person on the screen sort of staring off into the middle distance. So yeah, if they're wrestling with a particular choice, or again, kind of delving back into that sort of magic discussion, are they wrestling with somebody in their mind? How do you translate interiority onto the screen?
Yeah.
That's always a discussion, I think, for visual adaptations in particular. But I also think trying to translate that into like an audio medium can be tricky, especially because it can so often sort of trying to sort of represent what a character's thinking and sort of their interiority. If you're trying to translate that to a purely audio medium, it turns into just like kind of a monologue, or like a voiceover sort of thing.
Mhm.
And it gets very, I don't know, it can get a little bit lost in the weeds a bit, or that's what I've kind of found in some horror adaptations.
I agree. There's also something that I always try to hold as a viewer of an adaptation, especially because most of us here, I think we're involved in film school, art school, theater majors, etc. So I am always trying to hold both my preferences as a viewer of what I'd like to see and what the original thing was against
Mm.
what is reasonable in adaptation,
Mm.
whether I like it or not.
Mhm.
I sometimes have to recognize that, yeah, the thing I would have loved to see doesn't translate well into this medium. And I don't have to like that, but I do have to appreciate the work that was done.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And there's a TikTok from Brandon Sanderson, who's another sort of like mythopoeic author, and he talks in there about an adaptational choice in Lord of the Rings that is about the decision to have Sam leave Frodo behind for a bit and then come back. And he talks about exactly that thing, Leah, the interiority, trying to bring that to the screen. You can't just adapt the thing that Sam does, because if we don't have that interiority and a way to show it, everyone who hasn't already read the books has no idea how great
Mhm.
Sam is.
Yeah.
And so I a lot of times I can categorize that under thanks. I hate it, but yeah, you had to do it.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I am very sorry for what I'm about to say, but that's kind of like a reverse 50 Shades of Grey. Hear me out. Because they take away the inner monologue of Anastasia Steele, it actually makes that adaptation way better, because it's not as misogynistic. It is a way more feminist narrative in the first movie. I can't speak for the rest of the movies, but like taking away that inner monologue really did a lot of good.
What, someone's inner goddess and inner cheerleader are not valued members of the adaptational
This is Leah learning that Alicia has seen the 50 Shades of Grey movie.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have.
This is me revealing clearly that I read it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, can we do like a watch along like with the three of us where I am like discovering this for the first time?
I am
Yes.
thankfully on the book and the movie.
Oh my
Yes,
god.
exactly.
We'll
Oh.
fill you in about the shit in the book, and also it'll just be an entire primer of the, and this is how you don't do kink, actually.
Yep,
Right,
exactly.
right.
Amazing.
Look, it is an educational tool.
Yeah. If you want to hear more of our thoughts about 50 Shades of Grey, go back to the Ang Bang episode. We discussed it at length.
Exactly. There you go. There you go.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, shit.
Oh my goodness.
Speaking of previous episodes, in terms of Tolkien's views on adaptation, we covered a fair bit of this in our 11th episode, which is Tolkien Would Hate This Podcast, Part 1, Fans, Interpretation, and Adaptation. Check out that episode for more of that context, but it mostly boils down to paraphrase what Alicia said right before we started recording, I will hate it, but I'm amused to see you try.
And I will happily take the money that will come my way as a
Harder
result.
cash.
Very
Art or
important.
cash.
Very important. Yeah,
And-
opposite end of the spectrum from fuck it, it's cool, but
Yeah.
very important to add in. I will happily take your cash because I have 4 kids to feed.
Yeah.
And genuinely, I can't think of a single response that I have seen of Tolkien's to any adaptation made within his lifetime that was anything more than grudgingly accepting.
Mm.
He was highly critical. He did have ideas of how his vision should come to various mediums, and he was absolutely willing to point out where there were discrepancies. He was very willing to provide us with that.
He and George R. R. Martin are very similar in that way.
But that didn't stop there from being adaptations. That didn't stop him from releasing the rights. That didn't stop him from giving feedback along the way of what he hoped to do and guide particular adaptations to. So I think we have to be very careful while definitely acknowledging all of the curmudgeonly sort of perceptions he would have. That didn't mean that he didn't think there should be adaptations, and it doesn't mean that people are doing something wrong to adapt this work into a variety of different mediums today.
Amen.
So we've broken this down into kind of several different categories just to try to group adaptations by their similar sort of mediums, right? So we've got television to film. We're going to talk about some of the like radio play adaptations. We've got some like stage productions to talk about, video games, and we're also going to talk about some adaptations that never actually made it to fruition as well, just because somebody set out to make an adaptation of The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings or what have you does not mean that it actually came to fruition. And then we also have some fan projects that we're going to talk about too. So, jumping right in, we're going to start with television and film.
And the four of us are all relatively familiar with most of these through a sort of tradition that started with the Mythopoeic Society's online events, where I was kind of looking for some evening entertainment to do. For anybody that doesn't know, I am the conference steward for the Mythopoeic Society, and so I'm part of the organizing for all of their events. And we were looking for basically some like evening activities that were sort of, more low key, just kind of fun. People could just join in and drop in and out. And so my thought was this was right around the time, if everybody remembers, sort of early in COVID, when that Chronatelli Russian Lord of the Rings adaptation sort of resurfaced and went viral. And so I was like, that looks like fun. Why don't we sit down and watch that as a group at one of our online events? I think it was the first online MythCon. We only did one that was like MythCon, and then we switched to online seminars. And then we basically did like a sort of riff tracks mystery science theater, kind of like tearing it apart, because some of these do deserve to be torn apart a little bit.
With love. With love.
Exactly.
Lots of love.
With affection.
Yes.
And then we started doing it with more. So we did some others as well. And so we would do like one or two, maybe if they were short, for a single event. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. But I think we sort of started to realize as well that it was really interesting to see sort of which characters or scenes or elements each of the creative teams decided to include or omit in their adaptations. So I think, if you were to look at all of these together, all the ones we're going to talk about here, they probably end up covering every scene from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And I will say as well that you can find them all on YouTube with like English subtitles. So, and I'm going to try in the show notes as well to include, I do have a playlist as well of all these adaptations so that you don't have to go like hunting for each of them.
But yeah, it is kind of interesting to like think about like if you were like to edit it all together, like would you actually have like a really super
complete,
faithful,
if very disjointed adaptation?
Now I'm kind of like,
mostest faithfulest adaptation of Lord of the Rings ever.
Yeah, I mean, like kind of amazing. That'd be kind of amazing to see.
There's only one version of Scouring of the Shire to choose, and we'll get.
Oh
there.
yeah.
Ooh,
yeah, I was gonna say, but there's a couple of Tom Bombadils, which is
spoilers.
Spoilers.
So yeah, chronologically speaking, the first ever adaptation of any of Tolkien's works in a visual medium was The Hobbit. It was an American adaptation by Rembrandt Films. Came out in 1961, and it was basically one of those sorts of projects that just got made because they had to, or they were going to lose the rights. They were not going to fulfill the licensing agreement that they engaged in. And it is quote unquote animated, if you can really call it that. It's pretty much like a camera like panning across like some storybook painted kind of images. And a lot of it is seems to be similar to the style of, if anybody knows the like Disney artist Mary Blair, if you know like that really distinctive art style of the backgrounds on like Sleeping Beauty, for instance, or like the It's a Small World designs for the rides. That's who the art really reminds me of. It's very vibrant, very bright, like a
Yeah.
sort of kid's storybook.
Yeah, it's not like watercolor, but it's like more like gouache or something like that, but there's like a really lovely I think that the images themselves, like, even though there's like really no actual real animation in it, I think that the images themselves are actually really cool looking. I think that they kind of remind me a bit of the very infamous Ballantine paperback covers,
Mhm.
like the psychedelic kinda emu, sort of Tolkien covers. So I kind of have a fondness for this one. I think that this one's really out there. It's one of those kind of fuck it sort of things.
And it's about as faithful to the novel as those Ballantine covers are
Exactly,
to
exactly.
things that actually occur in
That's
Lord of the
yeah.
Rings. So the whole thing's less than 12 minutes. There's a princess of Dale
Yeah.
that sort of begs Bilbo to help her retake Dale from Slag, the monstrous lizard, instead of Smaug.
Slag.
Yeah, and like I just don't know why they made some of these changes. Trolls that Bilbo encounters are called groans instead, and they look like they're made of wood. I'm not really sure why. They're like kind of halfway in between, like a troll and an ent.
Wild.
Gollum's like a hairy little like gnome kind of guy.
In fairness to this comparison to the Ballantine book covers, presumably someone on this production team had access to the novels,
Right?
right? Like these
You'd
choices
think.
were made after reading.
Yes, this is very much like a how do we make this marketable or whatever, right? And
Yeah, I really enjoy that, like, inserting superfluous female characters really dates back to the actual first adaptation.
it's a tradition for The Hobbit.
Yes.
Oriel was not the first.
Misogynists can die mad about it.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
So this adaptation only had one screening in 1967 with some like random people they just got off the street. They gave them the money for the admission so that they could say these people paid to see this animated color adaptation of The Hobbit, which is
Oh my
all the
God.
contract stipulated. It didn't stipulate how long it had to be or anything like that, or how faithful it had to be or whatever. It's basically just, yep, we did it.
Amazing.
Money, please.
Amazing.
So then as you're going to the next chronologically in terms of visual television or film adaptations, you've got, and I am so sorry because I do not speak Swedish and I'm going to make this very incorrect, and so I'm going to apologize in advance. Swedish adaptation in 1971, Sagan om ringen. It's about 30 minutes long. Live actors inserted into hand-drawn backgrounds. It's inspired by a musical album by Bo Hansen that was inspired by Lord of the Rings, which it uses a soundtrack, sort of the vibes are like psychedelic rock jam band with
Yeah.
a lot of organ.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have that
Oh, I
album.
just remembered this one.
Yeah. I have that
Ew.
album and yeah, I dig it, man. I dig it.
I haven't gotten
It's pretty
stoned yet and
groovy.
listened to this album. I need to do
Oh.
that.
I was gonna say I I need to like take mushrooms and listen to this album and see where it takes me.
Well, the plot only takes itself from Bilbo's birthday party to the Fellowship leaving Rivendell, and there it leaves off.
Okay.
We can all jump in here with a few of our favorite things about it.
So there are gender swapped roles in this, which is nice. 3 of the 4 hobbits are I don't have a list of the actual cast because it's lost to the ages. I couldn't find it anywhere online. But 3 of the 4 hobbits do appear to be played by female actors.
Huh.
And this isn't the only adaptation I'm going to say this about. It does feel a lot like stage actors who are cast in a film production, like maybe the National Swedish Theater or something like that. I don't know. This is also the one that has the giant ring. Like it feels like
Oh yeah.
you know the Lego set, like Lord of the Rings, that where the ring is
From
like
his fist.
larger, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, larger than
It's
the
like the size of
hand
their
of any
hand. Yeah.
of any of the figures. It's about to that scale.
Oh, man.
But one of the unique things in this, and I think this is, as far as I know, the only time this happens, the hobbits not only see the elves marching west, but as they do in the books, they actually meet up with them and like break bread with them and have like a little meeting with them, which again, like that's something in, the 50 plus years since we have never seen in an adaptation.
Yeah, no one
Yeah.
gives a shit about Gildor.
Yeah.
We do get Tom Bombadil in this Swedish adaptation. We also get Old Man Willow and Glorfindel. This is
Can't
one
believe
of
we
the
get Glorfindel.
only
That's crazy.
adaptations to give us Glorfindel
That's
and
crazy.
Askeladd.
Maybe the only one. I don't know if Glorfindel pops up in any of the others.
I'm trying.
Well, okay,
I
this is
can't
fun.
remember.
Technically, there is an actor who was cast as Glorfindel in the Peter Jackson movies and will sign like trading cards and things that way, but of course has very little screen time, if any, no
You see
lines.
him over Elrond's shoulder in one fucking scene.
Gonna
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
I know exactly who you're talking about.
See,
I'm actually afraid you may not, because that's a different actor.
oh, okay. I was gonna say, is that the guy like wandering in the background when he's talking?
No, that's
I'm always
actually
like-
CGI.
Oh. See, I always
But
want to know what's up with
there-
that guy, but
There is
whatever.
actually an actor who will sign things as like the actor who plays Glorfindel and like sign them as Glorfindel.
That's cool.
And the really best substantiation that we get that this actor was cast as Glorfindel is that there's a trading card game or something where he is the image of Glorfindel and it is the same actor who was in the background of the films. So technically, there's
Fantastic.
the most like 17 different asterisks on it, sort of the Glorfindel and the big budget ones.
Hashtag not my Glorfindel.
Yeah.
This is really like the only adaptation here where you actually get the character of Glorfindel.
And he like helps heal Frodo and like takes him on Aspaloth to Rivendell.
Like it was really cool to see that. Fascinating switch up there though. In trade, there's no Boromir.
Well, we don't need
Aw.
Boromir if we're ending in Rivendell.
I was gonna say,
That's pretty much it,
nobody
right?
cares.
We form the entire fellowship and leave Rivendell with no Boromir.
Yeah, no, fuck him. Who needs
Who
Boromir?
cares?
Maybe it's
Who
an
cares?
AU where Boromir doesn't exist and the fellowship
Ooh.
never breaks.
Oh.
Well, no, the fellowship breaks before Boromir. Excuse me.
True. Well, the rest
Wow.
of the fellowship never breaks.
Speaking of the Council of Elrond in this adaptation,
For some reason, like 10 minutes of this 30-minute adaptation of Fellowship of the Ring is the Council of Elrond.
No, I mean that's how it feels like when you're fucking reading the book
I was
too.
gonna say,
right?
so it's just like the book, where it's like
Yeah.
a full third of the book is
I
at the
know-
Council of Elrond. Okay,
I know the
that makes
Council of
sense.
Elrond feels like a third of the Fellowship of the Ring, but it is not technically in terms of page count.
It is the longest chapter in all three
It
of the books, though.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm, mhm.
And strangely, Elrond also appears to be wearing one of those like aluminum space blankets. Like that was what his
Aw.
costume appears to be made of. It's like reflective silver material.
Like one of those emergency, like bivvy sort of blankets.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
FEMA had to come to Rivendell.
Exactly.
jeez. All right. Next, chronologically, we get two of the more famous non-massive budget adaptations, and that's the Bakshi and the Rankin and Bass ones. Rankin Bass chronologically is The Hobbit in 1977 and Return of the King in 1980. But with that caveat, we're going to talk about that one second. We're going to talk about the Bakshi film first because, as you talk about a Lord of the Rings adaptation, that's what you got there.
Yeah, so there's kind of a whole long history to this that I know several YouTubers have done pretty good videos about if you're interested in the whole production. But the script is originally by Chris Conkling, but Peter S. Beagle, yes, that Peter S. Beagle actually did basically a second draft and a punch up, which I think is pretty fascinating. This one is pretty famous, I think, for a lot of reasons and a lot of good reasons, and also kind of a lot of like weird reasons. Like Ralph Bakshi himself is kind of iconic as an animator. I kind of feel like we don't really get to see sort of his best work here because he was sort of doing a lot of experimentations with rotoscoping to more or less sort of effect, I guess. In some ways, like the Nazgul rotoscope effect is actually like pretty effectively pretty creepy, especially
Yeah,
when
for sure.
especially when they first encounter the hobbits. On the hard other end of the spectrum, the goblins and the orcs are kind of it kind of looks just like they kind of slap them in on top of a weird backdrop. So this one's kind of all over the place. Peter Jackson kind of famously mimicked and directly imitated a lot of famously the shot at Bilbo's birthday party of the moment where he says proud feet. Basically that's a direct adaptation from the Ralph Bakshi shot of that same moment. But yeah, I feel like a lot of people probably encountered this as younglings, and especially as they were first finishing the book and reading the book, probably in America. And I think that it kind of imprinted on a lot of people. There's a lot of really like funny moments here, which I think sort of make this sort of famous in a lot of the collective memory. It's weirdly faithful to the book, but it only goes up to Helm's Deep and Gollum plotting to lead Frodo and Sam to Shelob. So it's pretty much only to about almost the end of the Two Towers. So it's the Lord of the Rings, but there's a whole big chunk missing. You've probably seen the images online of these, but very famously in this adaptation is the pantsless Aragorn and the Viking Boromir.
Gondor has no pants.
Gondor needs no
pants. Exactly. Exactly.
There was a pantsless Aragorn, a Bakshi Aragorn cosplayer at Dragon Con this year. It was
Real good.
Beautiful.
Excellent.
Beautiful.
and he went up on the stage like that Evening at Bree, and he did the tripping over his sword that is in the animation and that they kept in.
Oh my god.
It is very important that knowledge of these adaptations do not die.
Well, that one lives on in a meme, so we're good.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
lives,
It's gonna
it
live
lives on forever. Yeah.
Strangely, I had never seen either the Bakshi or the Rankin Bass in their entirety until earlier this year. I finally sat down and watched the whole thing. Like I'd only seen bits and pieces of them up until then.
Yeah, if you kind of want to get into the history of this was kind of a wild production, but I did want to drop in this fact from my other life as a bad TV and film enjoyer. Apparently, David fucking Carradine offered to play Aragorn in this movie. I can't even imagine what a amazing movie that would have made. I am just like dying at the idea of David Carradine as Aragorn in this animated this animated movie.
I don't think I even really knew that David Carradine did like voice acting on top of like live acting, but his voice is so iconic that it doesn't surprise me. Like, but I feel like Aragorn would have been totally miscasting him. I feel like he should have been like Saruman or something like that with his like big
It was David Carradine.
Kung Fu, The Legend Continues. He was Bill in Kill Bill.
He was Bill in Kill Bill. He's a very prolific B movie and TV actor.
A part of the Carradine like family, legacy family of actors.
Yes.
Yeah, most famously for kung fu and martial arts roles. So I'm now I'm trying to like cast the rest of this movie with other like 60s and 70s actors, which I'm just like that's a project for another day. But yeah, I kind of have a lot of affection for this. Again, I feel like it does some of the animation in this. It isn't great, but I feel like that they took some swings, and I kind of admire it for that.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on, more or less chronologically, the Rankin Bass.
The Rankin Bass ones are where my nostalgia is. I've talked about this one or two times on the podcast before, but the gentleman who was the scriptwriter who wrote the Rankin Bass Hobbit and Return of the King specials was Romeo Muller. And I grew up in the same town where Romeo lived in upstate New York. And Romeo was Santa. That was just like his other thing he loved doing. And he wrote all of those, like Santa Claus is Coming to Town and Frosty the Snowman once and everything too. But I also grew up knowing that he had written The Hobbit and Return of the King.
That's very cool.
Another thing that's like really notable about the Rankin Bass ones is what the animation history is, because especially for The Hobbit, it was animated by Topcraft in Tokyo, Japan. That animation team went defunct and reformed as Studio Ghibli under Miyazaki. And so
Very
there
cool.
is a link between this particular Tolkien adaptation and all of the Studio Ghibli works.
You can see it. Like, you can see some of that influence bleeding through
Yeah.
from the Rankin Bass films into like later Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli for sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like musical time in there, surprisingly.
Mhm.
Some time skips and everything. We go from Bilbo's birthday party in Rivendell to Frodo and Sam in Mordor.
Yeah, the frame story is basically Frodo's celebrating with Bilbo in Rivendell and reminiscing basically about
In Return of the King, yeah.
in Return of the King, I should say. Return of the King pretty much covers just Return of the King. They kind of like sum up the rest of the action in a really quick sort of like, oh yeah, by the way, this guy is a king, so you know it's all cool, I guess.
Mhm.
A lot of people sort of think that The Hobbit and Return of the King were like that Rankin Bass had done The Hobbit, and then when the Bakshi version failed to go further than it did, then Rankin Bass decided to do Return of the King to like jump in after there and tie things up and sort of create it as a trilogy or whatever. And that wasn't the intention. Rankin Bass was already planning on doing Return of the King. However, if you have a memory of like watching all three of those in a row as a trilogy, that would be because there were home video releases that did that. There are a whole bunch of weird rights hijinks and who buys who and whatever. So that is definitely a reason why people have that recollection. Some of the songs are just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, the songs in both, I think. I mean, it's sort of like they're by that team of Rankin and Bass. It's sort of like they kind of come up with some pretty iconic bangers, I guess, of our childhood. Yeah, I really like a lot of these songs. I mean, some of them are completely. I mean, I should say all of them pretty much are completely ridiculous, but they're kind of endearing, you know?
Yeah.
Is the really warbly Frodo of the Nine Fingers?
Yeah.
That's the Rankin Bass, right? Not the Bakshi.
Yeah. The cast of this is baller. The minstrel Glenn Yarbrough, who has a very distinctive voice, but they got a lot of folks to provide voiceovers for both of
Orson Bean was Frodo, I think, right?
Yeah, Orson Bean was Bilbo and Frodo in Return of the King, and Paul Frees, who's been in a lot of their stuff.
It's Tony the Tiger, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah. And like, you know, Casey Kasem was Mary and Roddy McDowell was Sam. Like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And in The Hobbit, John Huston was Gandalf. He played Gandalf in both of those films, and Paul Frees. And also there was a few other like mainstays of the Rankin Bass sort of productions. Like you would recognize their voices, you know, like if you've seen a lot of those things, you would know them. But yeah, like the Return of the King cast, I think is pretty baller in a lot of ways because you're like, what, Casey Kasem's in this? Are you crazy? Yeah, it's wild.
The Hobbit in particular is pretty faithful to the book too, generally speaking, in terms of like how broadly adaptations can go. The script won a Peabody Award. Right?
Which I think is wild. I didn't realize that, and I discovered that, and I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Which did not stop critics from also calling it an abomination. You cannot please all of the people all of the time.
Yeah, I have actually never watched any of these animated versions all the way through because I cannot do it. I can't do it. God. I have watched Where There's a Whip, There's a Way. And then I just pieced right out after that.
Here's the thing.
It's going to happen, Alicia. We're going to make you sit down and watch it.
Where There's a Whip, There's a Way is one of my favorite things.
Oh my God.
Amazing.
It's so good.
It's amazing. So catchy. It's so good. And you've got to, you know, where there's a whip, there's a way. With the whip cracks in there. It's so important. It is
Yeah, oh my god.
Mwah, chef's kiss.
It's giving marching band 100%. Like it like deep memory of marching band unlocked during that song.
As you say, is that the trauma? That's why
Yeah,
you can't watch it all the way through.
It's so good because it goes so over the top, defies some expectations, but also I genuinely, like, this is one of my soapboxes. I genuinely think that that adaptation in that song does so much more to get at the heart of what Tolkien is writing about with orcs and what he's writing, how he's writing orcs in Return of the King than
Totally.
almost any other adaptation. Like, really, the next line after that iconic, like, where there's a whip, there's a way, is we don't want to go to war today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I love that. Just unironically love that song.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the internet is big mad lately. We'll talk about Rings of Power season 2 at some point, but about the orcs being humanized in season 2 of Rings of Power, and it'd be like,
Yeah.
bitch, go back and complain to Rankin Bass because they did that shit first.
Go back and
Excuse you.
complain directly to Tolkien.
Yeah. For real. For
Like,
real.
excuse you, this sounds like you both haven't read and also have not seen the cinematic masterpiece, The Rankin Bass Return of the King. Specifically, the musical iconography, like, just, where there's a whip, there's a way.
Yeah.
I did
The
also
Peabody
just,
winning, where there's a whip, there's a way.
thank you. Yes.
Amazing.
So I did also pull out something from my personal archives here, and that is in the town where I grew up, there was, for 1 year, there was a quarterly humor magazine published called The Highfalonian, and it was published in the late 1970s, like 1979, 1980. And most of it is absolute nonsense. All these little in jokes that only the people in this like 500 person town would get or whatever. But there's also a section where they interview local famous people, because we had a strange number of local famous people where I grew up. Like, one of the interviews is with Pat Carroll, who was the voice of Ursula in The Little Mermaid.
Yeah, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so there's a 2-page article about Romeo Muller that I will find a way to link in the show notes or whatever, or put up on the social media. But there is a little reference in here to him working on The Hobbit, and it talks about, quote, his most recent achievement was an animated version of Tolkien's The Hobbit. I personally would have preferred to use the real characters. And then it goes on to talk about his process and everything like that. So I do also just love that it's something that people in my community knew he was working on and everything, that it was something that folks were excited about and everything, and that there's this weird little record of this tiny humor magazine that talks about it too. So we'll share those just in case anybody wants to read the whole article.
Very cool.
Going forward, then we're into the 1980s now, and we get The Hobbit, Union 1985.
It's the first
In
one
my
I'm alive
defense-
for.
Me too.
I wasn't alive yet.
Oh, I love the name of this one. It's fantastic. It's The Fabulous Journey of Mr. Bilbo Baggins, the Hobbit, across the wild land through the dark forest beyond the misty mountains, there and back again.
It literally sounds like Bilbo wrote that title.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's great. This was one that we watched again at one of the online MythCons. It's kind of a trip. I love this kind of stuff, but I think we're kind of going to be talking a bit about some of the non-English and specifically like Soviet and Finnish and other adaptations, which I think bring a really, again, kind of a wild sort of aesthetic, I guess.
They give us a chance to see the story through a completely different cultural lens, and I think that's really valuable, actually, as we start to look at adaptations.
Yeah, I think it's really cool.
I think one of the interesting through lines of these like Eastern European kind of adaptations is that they generally have a frame story narrator.
Yeah.
This one does. And the narrator in this one is the professor. Like, it's obviously supposed to be Tolkien, and it's kind of set up like an Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
very Soviet version of Tolkien kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
This was again in Soviet Union, so they did not have a budget at all.
No.
But but so but they do their gosh darn best. The puppet of Smaug, I think, is actually kind of amazing.
Yeah.
The puppet of the eagles bearing away Gandalf, less so, but
That's not this one. That's the Soviet Lord of the
Yeah, that's
well,
Rings.
the
that's right.
next
There's
one.
a
This is
different one. This is the
different.
next
Yep.
one. Okay, well then
Yeah.
edit that out, Tim.
This one just has the Smaug puppet.
The Smaug
Yeah.
puppet is interesting because they actually reused the Golem's hands for Smaug's hands.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Oh my
old the fucking
God.
old Greg looking golem with like sticks and shit growing out of him.
I'm
Mhm.
I'm
yeah.
convinced this is where
Yeah.
old Greg came from.
Yeah, it really feels like it. And they actually cover more of the riddles. Like I don't know, it's been a while since I've read Riddles in the Dark, but it feels like they almost cover all of the riddles that are actually in the chapter. There's definitely more in this than there are in the Jackson Hobbit movies.
Yeah, more than in most
Wow.
adaptations. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say, I think the reason that we had to reuse the puppet hands is because this next item is where 60% of the budget went, and that is to glitter Gandalf.
Yes. That's
A
right.
lot of glitter in both the beard and the hair.
So much glitter, and such an interesting color palette.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thorin is very orange, like bright orange hair, like tangerine orange hair and beard.
What a choice.
And then his costume matches his hair. And I'm going to tell you, folks, the fucking upload quality on some of these videos is trash.
Oh, it's like 4 pixels.
Yeah, it's like 360p kind of thing. And sometimes it's real hard to see where the hair ends and the actual costume begins. It just all kind of blends in together. Sometimes it kind of looks like Thorin's whole costume is just hair. That's
Oh my
weird.
God.
Well,
Wild.
I mean, that is pretty fucking Tolkienian, though. Like the dwarves in The Hobbit are very colorful in the
Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
and they've been pared way down for the Jackson adaptation.
Yeah,
So,
muted a
like,
lot.
I mean, I don't think he was thinking like Dayglow Neon, but
Kind of a Kool-Aid orange. Yeah.
And this is the first one where we get like a lot of psychedelic guitar in the soundtrack. All the adaptations up till here, if it's had like modern flavored music, it's been more folksy.
Mhm.
Now we're starting to get more into like rock entering the equation, which is strange and doesn't really match. But then there's also a lot of singing in these Russian adaptations. And the singing and the more folksy songs definitely have a very like Russian and Baltic kind of flavor to it, which
Yeah.
I definitely never heard that reading the books or anything, but I can
Yeah.
obviously, if you grew up with that sort of frame of reference, then you may have heard the songs and stuff from the books and that kind of that timbre, right?
Yeah.
yeah, like a lot of them, like they almost border on Gregorian chant.
Yeah, a little bit
Yeah.
somber.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really enjoy watching these because like some of the choices are just like some of them are like swinging for the fences and others are like, yeah, we have like $2 to make this, so we're gonna make it work.
Fortunately, we came in under budget.
Yeah.
And then some of them
Exactly.
clearly had some budget, but just used it in really puzzling ways.
Wild ways. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like the glitter budget.
Yeah. The glitter budget was very big.
Separate line item for sure.
That's an interesting through line too. I'm pretty sure that like Gandalf's costume in The Hobbit was not actually, or the Peter Jackson's The Hobbit was not actually inspired by this, but he also has like glittery stuff in his scarf, right? Like there are metallic threads woven into that scarf.
Glitter means magic.
Well, Gandalf the gay.
Yes. Exactly.
So
Aw.
chronologically, we still stay in this region for the next adaptation, which is Chronatelli, 1991. Guardians of the Ring is what it translates to, and it's about 2 hours long.
Mhm.
It only adapts Fellowship, and there's definitely something infamous about this production.
There's many things infamous about this
Leah?
production.
Yes. So some of these budgets clearly had different priorities, and
You're trying so hard to be nice about this.
I need everyone to know that Tim is helping on our screens here by acting out the point that he is trying to make.
but basically, instead of having any sort of semblance of Gandalf riding a giant eagle to safety, they basically hold up a stuffed pigeon like right in front of the camera lens and have Gandalf flap his arms in the background.
Which is what Tim was portraying for us. I know that this is an audio
Oh.
medium, but I just need people to envision this visual.
You really have to get across the horror of what this thing looks like. You
It's
know,
like a
like
poorly taxidermied like pigeon kind of thing.
okay, so old people used to like carve faces into apples and then let them wither. It looks kind of like a bird version of that.
Of an Applehead doll.
Yeah, and he's not just in the background flapping his arms, he's also just like crouching and like moving back and forth like he's surfing while flapping his arms.
Yeah.
We'll post a picture. I will 100% post this on social with no explanation
It's really
as a
it's
teaser for
truly,
this episode.
it's truly a thing of beauty. I have to say.
We've made it into a reaction emoji on the Mythopoeic Society's Discord server.
Yeah. It is affectionately become known as Potato Eagle.
Yeah,
So good. I love it. I love it so much.
it's fantastic.
So, and the actors in this adaptation definitely feel like stage actors as well. In this one, there actually is a pretty solid Wikipedia entry on, so you can go and read a lot about like what went into this production, the organization, how slapdash it was put together, all that sort of stuff. Because again, like when it sort of resurfaced, a bunch of people were like, I need to know everything
I need
about
to
how
know
that
everything
came
about
together.
this.
And because it was only, like 20 something years earlier, they went and found a bunch of the actors and like did interviews and stuff with them about like what it was like to make it.
Fantastic.
But some of the sets and stuff look like they were from like community theater productions as well, and I don't say that as a compliment. A lot of the makeup feels like very stage makeup, and if anybody knows stage makeup, it is not meant to be viewed up close. And they do a lot of close-up shots of these characters with stage makeup because they're stage actors. That's how they know to do makeup, right? So there's more psychedelic folk rock and guitar solos on this soundtrack, and maybe it works sometimes. Most of the time, I'd say it pretty much doesn't.
I dig it. I dig it, man. Pretty groovy.
We do get Tom Bombadil and an even rarer appearance from Goldberry.
Yeah.
And they're huge. They're like 3 or 4 times. Like you think of Tom Bombadil or Goldberry as like roughly man or elf sized, right? And so a couple feet taller than hobbits. Nope, here they're like clearly 3 or 4 times taller than the hobbits. I have no idea why.
It's kind of cool though. I kind of like the idea of a giant Goldberry. Like, hell yeah.
And they definitely smear because they have like sort of an intro scene establishing shot with Goldberry where she's sort of dancing and they have so much Vaseline smeared on the lens you can hardly see her. Like it's like soap opera level of like fuzzy shot.
One of my second favorite part, because Potato Eagle, very close to my heart. My second favorite part of this is the fact that they hired a ballet troupe to play the Barrow Wights, and they do this like interpretive dance.
With again, very like truly horrifying full face, like caked on makeup.
Oh, it's awful.
Amazing.
Oh god.
Amazing.
I'm pretty sure I've had fucking night terrors about those. But this adaptation also does give us gender swapping of a character. Legolas is female in this. It only goes until the end of Fellowship of the Ring, so we don't spend much time with female Legolas, but she's there. She's doing stuff in the background kind of thing. And then Ren, this ends right after breaking the fellowship, so we don't get to see any of this to completion, which is an ongoing theme here as well, right? Like none of the Lord of the Rings adaptations we've talked about so far have gotten through the whole story. They've all been bits and pieces.
Yeah. And we're going to stay here in the same region, and we're going to stay in the same year, 1991, for an animated Hobbit from the out of the Soviet Union.
I am so fucking upset this didn't get made.
Yeah. This is probably the least known of any of the adaptations, and I was literally just like searching around for random adaptations, and I think it was like after we'd finished watching one of these other ones at one of the Mythopoeic Society's events, and I was like, what the hell is this? 6 minutes animated Russian Hobbit? Okay, let's watch this. And everybody's had a few drinks, let's just watch it. And sitting there like being ready to make fun of it, holy shit, it's good.
It's so good.
Like, damn it, it's really good.
Yeah. The designs are like really kind of beautiful, and I don't know, there's a kind of a strange animation quality to them, but which I think again kind of adds to some of the psychedelic sort of, I don't know, aesthetic that a lot of these Soviet era adaptations kind of lend themselves to. But yeah, it's amazing, and only 6 minutes of it really exists.
Like when you're prepared to hate watch something and it's actually good, it has to be really good to go above that level where you were ready to mock it. And we all had to admit it's really good.
Yeah.
And there's a really lovely part of it too for our queer lodgings sort of framework here.
It does actually depict a kiss between two men at a like feast or festival in Dale. They're sort of like sitting behind a banquet table, tossing back drinks, and one just grabs another dude's face and fucking plants one right on his mouth.
Aww.
Yeah, I was just frantically Googling because I could not remember Don Bluth's name. But like that's the kind of like vibe that the animation was giving me.
Yeah.
Yeah, the character designs are a little more Japanese, like anime inspired, but the animation style itself, and especially the backgrounds, definitely give that Don Bluth kind of feeling, that like Anastasia, Bible Goes West kind of,
Secret of Nim, but less scary.
Less traumatizing.
Yeah, less traumatizing. for sure.
I'm just gonna say, like that lovely kiss between the two men in Dale. Adaptations take note. That's how good kisses are done.
Oh, good Lord.
Salty about anything.
Stay tuned for our Rings of Power Season 2 episode.
Oh boy.
I'm gonna be needing to give it like 20-minute soapbox just to rant.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm gonna have to go like get like a sandwich or something.
Our
and just
4-part 9-hour long. Well, let's leave Russia finally, the Soviet Union. Let's go to Finland.
Hobbitit.
Hobbit is my favorite. This is my favorite of all of these like low budget adaptations. It is 3.5 hours long. It is a 9-part miniseries. It was filmed in 1993, and I need you to know just off the bat, they do every single verse of the Cow Jumped Over the Moon song at Prancing Pony. Every single one.
Because priorities.
I timed it today. It's like 3.5 minutes. Like this 3.5 hour adaptation decided to take like, I don't know what percentage that is of their overall runtime, right? It's 210 minutes, and more than 1% of this entire adaptation is the Cow Jumped Over the Moon song.
Priorities.
And
priorities.
They spend longer on that than they do in Moria.
Yep.
Yeah, this is probably my favorite too. There's so much to love in this,
So
again.
I'm trying to get a cosplay group together of the Fellowship from this movie.
Hell yeah.
I'm with you on this.
This one, even though it translates to The Hobbits, it mostly adapts Lord of the Rings, although it does actually go back into The Hobbit and basically adapts all of Riddles in the Dark, as well as where Pornstache Bilbo finds the ring in Gollum's cave. and also Smeagol obtaining the ring too. It
He
goes
had a
back.
mustache in that.
I mean,
Just
it's
like-
pretty good, but there's still some puzzling choices, and that's like the whole. Like, each of the episodes are about 20 minutes each. That's the whole first episode, is basically recapping the journey of the ring. Well, basically until the ring, when it falls into hobbitish hands, kind of thing, until where we find it at the start of Lord of the Rings. And there's even some weird, like, early CGI on the opening titles. I mean, this is 93. Toy Story is the next year. But there's like a CGI ring that flies into the title screen.
And that was their entire budget.
Yeah.
I think it's very important to note that this was the same year that Jurassic Park came out?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that it's so exciting to really see a full spectrum of CGI capabilities, all the way from big budget Hollywood to small market Finnish public television in the same year.
Yeah, this one also has a framing narrative. It's Sam telling the story to his 13 children.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet. And they keep going back to that throughout the story as well, especially when they need to glaze over one of the sections that they cut out. They basically just go back to Sam. We'll talk more about that.
Yeah.
When they glaze over the majority of Two Towers and Return of the King.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
That is what they did when they went through Moria for 15 seconds, though.
Yeah.
Again, priorities.
Yeah, out of everything, with the probable exception of the Rankin Bass and Bakshi movies, this probably has the highest budget. Well, this definitely has the highest budget of any of the live action adaptations we've talked about here. And it actually does have some like pretty nice shots, some like decent effects here and there, some miniatures. It's got some garbage too. This soundtrack shifts gears from rock into kind of like a jazzy soundtrack with like walking bass lines. Like during Smeagol's like transition into Gollum, he's got like a walking bass line under him, which is a choice. And in other places, there's like sort of synthesized orchestral music, but there's a lot of alto sax solos, like wailing over the synthesizer parts. Never thought I would see in a Tolkien adaptation, but okay.
So many choices in this one.
There's a lot of choices.
They give us a lot of content to work with the choices on.
Yeah, I do want to drop in really quick that it's based on a play. It's actually based on a 6-hour play. And so a lot of the same actors that were in the play are actually reprising their roles here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's like a Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Maybe that's why it's so charming. But yeah, lots of wild choices in this.
We get Tom Bombadil.
Yeah,
we do.
Right?
He's kind of styled like an indigenous shaman, which feels a little racist, but also kind of works with the character.
Yeah.
And
I just don't know if Finnish people can really get away with that. Definitely not in 2024. Maybe that was okay in 1993.
Arguable.
they do take a broad range of inspirations here and put them on display. For instance, Bree is styled like a Shogun village.
It's a pretty impressive miniature, to be honest. Like, it looks pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the inside of the prancing pony is like a Western saloon.
As one does.
As you
a lot
do.
Of homage. Let's call it pastiche.
Speaking of, we have to talk about, I think collectively, our favorite characterization of a character from Hobbit, and that would be Boromir.
My boyfriend.
Leah, can you tell us about Samurai Boromir?
So I'm convinced that when they gave this actor the brief for this part, they were like, so Boromir is a warrior, and he's like, stop right there. I know exactly what this needs.
My katana.
Yeah, he goes away and he comes back in full samurai vibes. Like, he's got like a crazy
scale mail shirt,
scale mail, like sleeveless tank top, a like big furry, like sort of like overcoat thing, a shaved head except for a ponytail held up in hair sticks, and a snake tattoo on his head, on the side of his head.
Uh-huh.
Samurai Boromir, and a full katana at
Oh.
the ready, and like a grimace on his face, like he has just like walked out of a Kurosawa film. I am convinced that like when he showed up on set, they were like, I what? And then they were like, they were too intimidated to say no, and they were like,
Like,
you know
they
what?
reached out, they
He's
were
just
like,
a samurai now.
we're short on budget. It's a massive scope for our project. The costume budget is running a little thin, and he's just like, say less. I got this.
Don't
He
worry
brought
about
that
this.
katana
I got
from
it.
home, and I'm pretty sure it's sharp.
Exactly.
So let's just let him go with it.
He also dies with more orc arrows in his chest than Sean Bean somehow.
Aw,
Yeah, I
And
think I counted like 6 or 7.
no, it's like
man.
30.
My God.
And every single one of those arrows is played by just a random stick that they picked up off the out of the
Stuck in him.
woods, cut
Oh
off
my
to have like a
God.
smooth end, and hot glued to his tunic.
It's amazing.
It's so ridiculous and therefore so good.
I want to cosplay as Samurai Boromir in your group, Alicia. Somehow, I don't know how, but I'm gonna make it happen.
Oh, if we're talking about our favorite characters, I want to like jump in.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Because my favorite character is Strider / Gollum.
Yes.
Who is played by an incredibly brave thespian.
It is 100% the same actor that plays Aragorn and Gollum, and I did not recognize him at first.
Yeah, which I think is kind of a cool choice in a lot of ways.
And
You
it
know,
makes
it's like
sense
there's
if you're
such-
trying to like save money, because like when is Gollum and Aragorn on the screen at the same time?
Exactly.
And when we were
exactly.
like 4 or 5 drinks in and trying to finally figured out that was what was happening, we were coming up with all sorts of like weird like theories about what that actually says about the nature of Gollum versus
Exactly,
Aragorn and
yeah.
shit too. What does this mean about good versus evil in
There's
Tolkien's
something
Middle
yeah, I was
Earth?
gonna say, there's
Commentary on
something very deep
monarchy.
here. Yeah. Something very deep to be explored.
Also, like Gollum's costume is literally a loincloth and a dance belt, and that's it.
Yep.
You see more of this man than you ever wanted to see.
So much Gollum cake
An
in this
incredibly
adaptation.
brave thespian.
Like, just imagine if Andy Serkis wasn't actually wearing that weird unitard.
Yeah, the little
Because this is a physical
him-
performance.
Oh, yes.
And
Yeah.
that loincloth is like 2 strings along his hips and then like very small patches of fabric.
It's working real hard. It's
Yeah.
working real hard, man.
It's working very hard. I think they worked very hard. I don't think there was an intimacy coordinator on set, and perhaps
No.
there should have
I
been.
don't think there was.
I have been to burlesque shows where I have seen less of somebody's body. Like,
Less taint.
yeah.
I have seen a production of King Lear in which Stacy Keach was completely nude, and I think I might have
Oh my
actually
God.
seen less of his taint than this man's.
Oh man.
Sorry, I'm just registering seeing Stacy Keach in as King Lear, and I'm like, again, what a thing. Okay, but anyway,
I have to drop
What a
the
thing.
alliterative beauty of Gollum's Grundle on us here.
Aww.
You're welcome, listeners. This time, it is Gimli who looks like a Viking for some reason instead of
Yeah.
Boromir. I don't know why. And they just made no effort to make any of them different heights. The hobbits and the dwarves and the elf and men are all the exact same height.
Yeah, my working theory is that the folks who played Legolas and Gimli were like practicing in their Finnish death metal band in the garage next door and just kind of wandered onto set and and they were like, "Hey, you want to be in this?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure, why not?"
Yeah.
I will say also the style of acting is like fascinatingly different than what we're accustomed to in America, right? Like I have a lot of fun, like humorously poking fun at like Finnish facial acting techniques that are employed in this film because they are very strongly employed by many actors.
Yes.
But it's also like it was also a moment of like, wow, this has to be a cultural lens that I was lacking because this has to be actually like important and like a studied process in this framework because it's not a choice that you could have just happened into. Like there's a tradition to this somewhere. So
I have to believe this is a cultural thing and not just that they've decided to do this for this one production specifically.
it's either a cultural thing or like one director's weird kink. So I'm
Yeah.
going with cultural thing.
Yeah. And I will say, pacing wise, it's makes some very strange choices as well.
Sure does.
So
Sure
there's
does.
9 episodes, and 6 of those are Fellowship of the Ring. At the end of the 6th episode, we have the breaking of the Fellowship and arrow-filled Samurai Boromir with a lot of blood,
R.I.P.
actually. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, way more blood than I think we ever really see in any of the Jackson adaptations on arrow-filled Boromir's chest.
Well, I should maybe like red blood, like
Yeah.
human blood. Yeah.
Yeah.
Practical effects.
Yeah. Then they're left having to cover all of Two Towers and Return of the King in 3 episodes.
Man.
In like 3 20-minute episodes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So to
Yeah.
do that, they basically just only follow Sam and Frodo for the rest of the story. They completely cut out anything Aragorn, Legolas, or Gimli, Merry, or Pippin are doing. Sam sort of glazes over some of that in the narration, but besides that, it's basically like we just see Sam and Frodo going off to Mordor.
I mean,
There's
it makes
no
sense
Rohan.
in the framing of this, though. Like, what did Sam's
Yeah.
kids don't give a shit?
Well, and it's Sam telling the story, so he
Yeah.
doesn't have the firsthand experience of the rest of that stuff, I guess,
Very
if
true.
we're really trying to justify the
Yeah.
fact that they
Yeah.
cut out all of Gondor, Rohan, and
I'm less
Yeah.
upset about that than I am what they did to Moria.
yeah.
I've referenced it too many times. The entirety of their sojourn into Moria is mostly taken up by Gandalf falling into a flushing toilet.
And I will point out, it's very important that we not get distracted by the Rohan or Gondor plot lines because the actor playing both Aragorn and Gollum needs time to get into costume. Okay?
Just doing a lot
Yep.
of work, man. He's
He's doing all that stuff in Mordor with Frodo and Sam, so he doesn't have time to be
Exactly.
Aragorn.
He doesn't have
too.
time to be
Exactly.
Aragorn, man.
Priorities.
Yeah.
Priorities.
But I will say that what this adaptation adapts, it makes some brazen choices about it, what it leaves out, but what it includes is relatively faithful to the books.
Mm-hmm.
Like in some cases more faithful than any of the others. Like this is the only case, the only filmed adaptation I know of that's not like a fan film or something that adapts the Scouring of the Shire.
Yeah.
It's not very long. It's like a few minutes, but it does cover it, and it talks about like the Bounders taking the feathers out of their caps. Like it's got that fucking ACAB sentiment in there, so go for it.
Yeah, and I feel like of some of these other adaptations, like we really are left with a really broken Frodo at the end of this one, which is kind of like I kind of appreciate that in some ways because throughout the entire series, I mean, he's been through some stuff, but like by the end of the show, it's like, man, this guy has seen some shit, and you can see it like on his face and in his words. And by the end of it, he doesn't really even like get on a ship. He doesn't go really to the Grey Havens, and you don't really see him kind of going off into kind of like a peaceful afterlife. Basically, he kind of just wanders off into like a gray mist, and you're just kind of left with the impression that he just kind of wanders off to like die somewhere, and you're kind of like, Jesus Christ, man, what's
It's
gonna
pretty dark.
happen to this dude?
He's being
Yeah.
haunted by the demons of Gollum's taint.
Yeah. One of those, you can't unsee that, right? It's burning
Yeah.
your retinas. I mean, I was going to say,
Ugh.
Elijah Wood's Frodo still has like a little bit of light in his eyes by the end, like before he gets on the
Especially
boat.
like right before he gets on the boat, you see that color kind of come back into his face, and you're like,
Yeah,
oh man, he's
yeah.
gonna be okay. And this one, you're like, Frodo's not okay. He's not gonna be
No.
okay. He's never gonna be okay again.
Instead of the Nazgul blade, he has the image of Gollum's Grundle burnt into his soul forever. That is the wound from which
Wound that he carries.
Finnish Frodo will never recover.
That wound will never fully heal.
Yeah, he goes to he does finally get to the Undying Lands. So we're like, sorry, bro, we can't do anything about that one. You
It's
fucks."
like staring directly into the sun.
One of the things that I do love about the reception of Hobbitit is that a critic writing in the Finnish Tolkien Society's magazine titled Legolas in 2004, please recall that that is after the Peter Jackson films have come out, recalled that Hobbitit had succeeded in, quote, capturing the atmosphere and spirit of the book, despite the fact that it was created on a small budget in quite shocking sets. Additionally, that same critic was doubtful of the Jackson film trilogy, as he felt that the epic and flamboyant side of the book that is emphasized in Jackson's film adaptation was not the most enduring and interesting aspect of Tolkien's work.
Wow. Okay.
I love
That's just like your opinion, man. I mean,
I love the shade throwing that goes on here, because it is worth noting that it is only 9 years between this production airing and the Jackson films premiering in theaters,
wild.
during which there was
Wild.
production time.
Wild to me.
Which makes you wonder if they saw this thing and were like, what to do, what not to do, clothe Gollum better.
Boromir shouldn't have a katana.
Yeah, maybe Boromir shouldn't have that snake tattoo.
Yeah, the snake tattoo is the most puzzling part of that, honestly.
It's like,
For me, it's the hair
like,
chopstick.
what is
It's the hair
happening?
chopstick.
I guess it's not really like a snake, but it's like a worm, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's like, what's with the dragon tattoo on your head there? Like, you're like, what? Like, what kind of, like, girl
man
with the
with the
dragon
dragon
tattoo thing
tattoo? I don't know.
are you doing here, man?
The weeb with the dragon tattoo.
Thing are you doing?
Damn it, Tim, that was amazing.
Oh no.
Okay, so that takes us through all of the TV and film adaptations. These are the ones that, sort of get to tickle most of our senses, right? They're visual as well as auditory choices are made, etc. But that's not the only type of adaptation that we see. And so we want to take a minute and just acknowledge some of the others. So, in particular, radio or audio adaptations. The first formal dramatization of Tolkien's work is an adaptation radio play from the BBC in 1955, 1956. Almost none of the original audio survives. I've caught like 4 seconds of it in a different interview that was then re-released later on. But in like 2022, I think the scripts were recovered.
Oh, wow.
They were thought to be lost as well, and most of them have now been recovered. And one of the things that I think is fascinating about this one is it's very much within the time frame of Tolkien's life, and very much within his cultural milieu, being a BBC production. It's in English, etc. And so just a peek into Tolkien's thoughts, he says, and this is from a letter to Allen and Unwin, I believe. I view the project with deep misgivings and do not expect to derive anything but pain and irritation from the result. But so long as I am firmly advised by you that is a good thing for the book, I am prepared to put up with that. So there we see the balance of curmudgeonly and concern about the end result of adaptation, as well as the recognition that adaptation is a good and sometimes necessary thing in order to bring more people to the work.
I
Mm.
am 100% just going to quote this verbatim for our Rings of Power season 2 episode.
Fair, valid. Our Rings of Power season 2 response is just a clip show of other times we've been annoyed.
Exactly.
We also then get some decades later, but we get what most people do think of when they think of a BBC radio adaptation. It's 1981, BBC Radio 4 does the adaptation. We get Brian Sibley and Michael Bakewell doing the script for
Mm.
this. It has a pretty interesting soundscape alongside the dialogue and narration, etc. Christopher Tolkien himself actually approved all of the scripts for this one. And the cast is really interesting. So you have Ian Holm playing Frodo. And of course, this is what is being drawn back onto with the casting of Ian Holm as Bilbo in the Jackson
Mhm.
films.
Mhm.
Sam is played by Bill Nighy.
Which I think is, yeah,
Like Bill Nighy of like
David
Underworld
Jones
and
very cool. Of many things, but
of
yes,
Love
which I
and
think,
Love
Actually, of
Actually fame.
yeah.
A fun note for our podcast listeners who are in the queer space. Bill Nighy is also very iconically in the film Pride, which talks about the gays and lesbians supporting the Welsh miners during the miner strike in the 1980s and, against Thatcher and all of that. He plays a queer character in that film and says it's one of the roles that he is most proud to have ever brought to screen. So that's just my personal plug that I would recommend that one for everyone who's on a queer journey.
He's really like one of those like working actors that I think has gotten a lot of spotlight attention, and like he's like one of those working actors who's kind of ended up being like an A-lister, I guess. But I feel like he brings like a
But later
very,
on in his career, yeah.
yeah, like he's always a very welcome presence in anything like big and small. And he's one of those working actors who treats everything that he's in, I think, as on equal levels. Like he brings his best to all of it. Yeah, I feel like for a lot of folks, especially in the UK, this is a really beloved and sort of treasured adaptation.
Yeah.
I know a lot of folks who actually say that their first exposure to Tolkien was through this adaptation, which I think is just so cool
Yeah.
because this is actually one that I've only heard bits and pieces of. I've actually never heard it the entire way through. And I really want to because it holds such a really like treasured place in so many people's hearts. And Brian Sibley himself is just such a wonderful queer man who I think he brings so much to all the things that he's done and is always a really, if you've been to Oxenmoot, he always brings just such a lovely warmth and liveliness to all of his talks. And he again,
Yeah.
he's like a national treasure to, especially to the Tolkien folks in the UK. And I love that he brought this to us for sure.
Yeah. There's also intentionality in this particular adaptation for the radio play. Peter Woodthorpe plays Gollum and Michael Graham Fox play Boromir. They had voiced the same roles in the Bakshi version. And so I think that link of continuity is a very interesting production choice for this adaptation and managing people's expectations and holding those and honoring those. I thought that was really neat. There are things there that are omitted in this one. I believe Crick Hollow, the Old Forest, Barrow White's Old Man Willow, and Tom Bombadil all hit the cutting room floor here. But there is a neat thing where there's an arc where Wormtongue encounters the Ringwraiths that is referencing an arc in Unfinished Tales that had just been published. And so it's also
Oh,
this
that's
very like
so cool.
almost like
Yeah,
up to
that's
the
neat.
moment piece of that adaptation. And we also get Bilbo's Lost Song included here, which isn't in the novel, but this is where we get this coming in.
Ah, that I didn't know that about the Worm
Yeah.
Tongue. I was to say I didn't know the Bilbo's Last Song. I know that there's like a little standalone volume of that, which I've been wanting to get my hands on
Yeah.
for a while, but that's very cool. I did not know that.
There's a few other notable radio plays or radio adaptations. In 1972, the New York radio station WBAI FM did their own version and continued airing it year after year after year. NPR did a version in America in 1979, and there's a couple of interesting casting notes with that one.
Yeah, so the voice of Gandalf and Tom Bombadil for that NPR 1979 adaptation was a gentleman named Bernard Mays, and a gay man and a major LGBT activist active in the Bay Area in that sort of period. Putri Piratini, who runs Blog Tolkien and is very active on Twitter, she actually did a really nice thread on Bernard Mays on Twitter when Queer Lodgings did the Tolkien Tuesday takeover last summer. So I
Yeah.
encourage you to go find that. You know, if you just, it's at Blog Tolkien. We'll put a link to it in the show notes as well. But if you just search like Bernard Mays and Blog Tolkien on Twitter, the only thing it's acceptable to dead name, you will find it.
And then there's a few other radio adaptations that are made in a like almost about a 10-year span between the early 90s and early 2000s that are not in English. And I think it's important to recognize that these adaptations keep getting made outside of an English speaking space and continue to reach people in other countries who speak other languages than what Tolkien first wrote in, right? So there's a German radio station, the Herr der Ringe, in 1992. There's a Danish adaptation that spans between 1999 and 2000. My pronunciation will not be great on this, but Eventyret om Ringen. And then there's also a Slovak radio series that aired between 2001 and 2003.
Interesting. I mean, you see that resurgence right around when the Jackson movies were
Yeah, I
coming,
was gonna
right?
say that was right when they were all coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have some of that happening in the stage space as well. So in Cincinnati, Ohio, there was a musical theater production that they ran like each one 2001, 2002, 2003. Lifeline Theater plays in Chicago, Illinois between 97 and 2001. It's also worth noting that without being specific adaptations, there's a lot of times that things that Hobbit in particular has been done as children's theater, and that's been a way
Mm.
that it's been made accessible to children who are perhaps even too young to read the books. They're still encountering
Mm.
Middle Earth, even that young. There's the first official theater production claims to be in Helsinki, Finland, prior to 1997. And then there's another Finnish adaptation to the stage in 2018. And I think the possibly the best known stage adaptation is the Lord of the Rings musical, which has been done in Toronto, London, and Chicago. And we actually have Tim here because he's the only one of us who's seen this adaptation.
I have. I was lucky enough to have seen the Toronto run, which was the first place that it showed at the Princess of Wales Theatre in Toronto in 2006. My mother and I went to see it together, sort of a long history of going to theater shows together. And I had a pretty middling response to it. There's some elements of it that were great. The production design was absolutely gorgeous. They had a turntable on the stage, so for all of the walking scenes, you can't have a Tolkien adaptation without walking scenes. And they had this turntable on the stage so that people could walk around in a circle and but be, staying in the same place on the stage. The stage was turning underneath them, which is pretty neat. And overall, like the set design and everything was gorgeous. Costumes were great. It just the songs were really hit or miss. There's a few like really
Mm.
great ones. There's this one called Now and for Always, which is Sam and Frodo singing to each other about like the stories that people will tell about them after their journey or whatever, regardless of how it ends, which is really touching and a very nice, like, intimate moment between the two of them. But a lot of the songs are very forgettable as well, I think, and it just really felt like it was sort of lacking soul, and that's probably why it played in Toronto, it went to the West End in London, and then it kind of died out. Whereas this new version that has been going around the last couple of years. Started last year in the Watermill Theatre in the UK, Berkshire in the UK. It seems to have a lot more heart, and they have like the cast is race blind and gender blind. They have like non-white people playing hobbits, other characters and stuff like that. Women playing male characters, all that. So that's all great. And then they also have some of those actors are actually musicians on the stage as well. So it's almost a concert, it seems like. To be clear, I haven't seen this version yet.
that's
I'm just
cool.
going off of people that I know that have seen it. And almost everybody I know that has seen this run of it, and a couple of them did see the original run, have vastly preferred this version. Not that it's perfect or anything, but it just seems to capture a lot more of the spirit of the source, I guess.
This is the one where Gollum is really swole, right?
This is, yes, the Gollum, and I don't recall the Gollum in the version that I saw in 2006. But yes, this is the version with Swallum.
Yeah.
So if you,
Oh my
we
God.
can't convey it, but look up a picture of Gollum, particularly, I think in the Chicago version as well, but in that Watermill production, and he is fucking ripped.
Beefcake Gollum. Amazing.
Yeah, 6-pack Gollum.
Ah, yeah, getting yoked. Man.
I will say, as someone with a theater background, the production quality in terms of set design, costume design, lighting design are all very impressive. Like the production stills are just, every time I see them, I'm like, gosh, I really want to see this show. I just have never had the opportunity. There's also a sort of famous parody version as well that it's not exactly a true adaptation, but this parody version is worth mentioning just in case folks are like, oh yeah, the musical, the funny one, the parody one. There's quite apart from the musical adaptation that has like all of this great production value, there is a very well-known parody version of Fellowship that was done in LA, and it's Fellowship the musical, and you will recognize the differences in production photos if you're just going through like a Google or Bing image search or whatever, and you will be delighted by both, I promise.
I thought Grace was going to start talking about porn parodies. I didn't research
That is
properly.
100% Alicia's role.
That's a different episode.
I was like, oh, that might be a different episode. And also, I was like, oh no, I didn't research any.
Also, Alicia, if you do start talking about that, that is absolutely going to be the point when my headphones die. And the other family members who are in this room will hear this recording.
Oh, I do feel like we need to mention that's a thing that exists.
And a lot of them.
Yeah, a surprising number. So when we were living in Atlanta, Tim and I, there's the Atlanta Tolkien fan group, and we basically got banned from being able to do any Tolkien trivia in Atlanta because we were obnoxious. And basically,
Well, by obnoxious, you mean because you kept winning and also fighting with the Quizmaster.
We destroyed everyone. And then we would do things like scream at the Quizmaster, book or movie. And they'd be like, it doesn't matter. And we're like, yeah, the fuck it does. One of the quiz nights we went to, the only question we got wrong was which of these is not an existing Lord of the Rings porn parody. Because I really thought, what was it? It was the Lord of the Ring, wasn't it? That was the one that wasn't an actual.
No, it was.
It was not Fellowship of the King. There are a number of them.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, like,
it was one ring to rule them all. That's the one that wasn't real because I thought it was like really on the nose.
I was gonna say that seems like that would be like the most obvious one. Like what?
Yeah, exactly.
That was not one. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's what it was because I remember being like really upset about it.
Wow. Okay. Well,
anyway.
So that's a thing that exists. Sorry, squeamish folks who don't think that porn and Tolkien mix.
Get wrecked. Tolkien wrote sex stories. We've already gone through this.
Hashtag release the elf.
Hashtag release the smut.
Not these specific ones. I'm sure he'd have adaptational critiques as well, but
Not enough forearms.
damn it, Alicia.
Forearms not tail enough.
What I was going to say is I'm sure he'd have adaptational critiques, but he had adaptational critiques about all of these. So really, what is the difference?
He was like, Gollum's not swole enough in this porn parody.
Jesus
For that, you need the musical. This is the service that we provide to help you make sure that you're aware of which things you'd like to watch and add to your viewing pleasure.
Oh, God.
So the next area that we want to talk about some adaptations in is the realm of video games. And for this, we are turning back to Alicia, who is our video game correspondent here in the space
Yes,
of
that's right.
Tolkienian video game adaptations.
Yeah, like, what a weird thing to be kind of the expert in.
I just love where you went from expertise A to expertise B.
Expertise in porn parodies and also video games.
I mean, it tracks, but okay.
Yeah, sure.
This is greatly pared down from the full list of every video game that like is based on the Lord of the Rings, because most of them don't actually try to adapt.
Oh.
There's a lot of video games where it is set in the world, but it's not an adaptation in any sort of way. But the first one that I can find any sort of mention of is the Hobbit software adventure from 1982. It's text-based, as are the Lord of the Rings Volume 1 and the Lord of the Rings Volume 2, which came out in 1990 and 1992, respectively. The Lord of the Rings Volume 1 was re-released in 1994 on the Super Nintendo, which I think is really interesting. So I'm assuming at some point, or at least at that point, it got some like sweet 16-bit graphics.
Hell yeah. Yeah.
There's this Tolkien collectors group on Facebook where people actually collect all of these old video games, and they'll post screen caps and stuff from them, but I have not seen one of Lord of the Rings Volume 1. There's also a MUD that has been a multi-user dungeon that has been going since 1994. It's still active.
Holy shit.
Called the Two Towers, or T2T.
Wow.
And that kind of takes us up to like the Jackson era. So like in 2002, Black Label Games released Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, which is not actually based on Jackson's movies. EA then released adaptations of The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and The Lord of the Rings, Return of the King in 2002 and 2003. They did not adapt Fellowship. Some of the Fellowship storyline actually happens at the beginning of Two Towers, but not all of it. There was also a Hobbit game called The Hobbit, The Prelude to The Lord of the Rings in 2003. And most of these games are shockingly not role-playing games. They're very much more like adventure games. And in the case of, let's skip ahead a little bit to Lord of the Rings Aragorn's Quest, which came out in 2010, that's actually more of a platformer, which is very strange. Because generally when you think about non-video games, board games that are based on Lord of the Rings and adapting it, they're more likely role-playing games. And Lotro, or Lotro, I pronounce it Lotro, was released in 2007. It is an MMORPG, or a massive I actually forget what the fuck
Massively
it was.
multiplayer role-playing
Online role-playing game. Yeah, we got there. I love Lotro so much. It is not a true adaptation of The Lord of the Rings. You're following the story of The Lord of the Rings, but as a tertiary character where you keep like bumping into what the primary characters are doing. So it is adapting, but not directly.
But it is incredibly immersive.
It is incredibly immersive.
You've really built out the world. If you want to, you have options for like quick travel, but if you want to, you can like actually ride from one place to another. And that's another thing that we've done at some of the Mythic Society's online events, is we've done like tours of Lord of the Rings online, so you can see various areas. Sometimes we've like themed it to whatever the theme of the event was. Like when we did Fantasy Goes to Hell, we had, okay, let's go visit some of the underworlds of Middle Earth in Lord of the Rings online. Like Moria, we took people down to the bottom of the the stairs where the Balrog and Gandalf battle and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about Latro is it has been in development since 2007, and it
Mhm.
has come in and out of having rights. So Warner Brothers bought the development company for a couple of years, and then they like divested themselves of the development company. So before then, they couldn't actually use any Peter Jackson's anything, and then there was a period where they could, and now they can't again.
Oh, man.
It's really interesting how they've like dealt with that though.
Uh-huh.
They in general keep closer to the books than the movies regardless, but you can see the influence of the movies because when they had the rights, it was when they were developing parts of Rohan and Gondor. So like you can see the influence of the Peter Jackson movies on the architecture in those particular areas that you can't see in other areas.
Edoras like
Mm.
looks a lot like it does in the movies and that sort of thing.
But it is
Mm.
more accurate to the books. Like the outer wall of Minas Tirith is black, like it's supposed to be,
Mm.
and that
Mm.
sort of thing. But there are so many like tiny little Easter eggs in this game. When you go to Weathertop, if you walk around Weathertop, you can see the little stream by which they had like they saw the crates that the Rangers left behind and the little hollow that they built
Oh,
the
right.
fire in. Like that is in the game.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
It's a crazy level of detail, especially when they've got those little bits of lore that they can just grab onto, or little. It's probably the perfect vehicle for all of those Tolkienian descriptions to come to life, right? Because you can't, when you're filming a live action adaptation, you can't, go out and find something that like looks exactly like what Tolkien described. In some cases, they manufactured it. But in this case, in a CGI world, yes, you can absolutely do that. You can create the environment exactly as Tolkien wrote it and have people go around and like find the little bits and pieces and the little like nooks and crannies.
You can't do it 100% exactly because Tolkien didn't really understand geology.
True.
Or hydrology.
He
Yeah.
did his best.
Written a paper that was it's based on an interview that one of the Latro landscape designers gave when they were talking about when they were first getting into Rohan. So they developed the map in stages and they had gotten to the falls of Ralros and they were talking about how it makes absolutely no sense for a waterfall to fall into a fen because it doesn't make sense. And if they're going
Yeah.
to render a three-dimensional environment, it has to make sense. The water has to flow. Like
Right.
the bluffs of the waterfall have to somehow communicate with this fen and then with the fields of Rohan. And they were discussing the adaptational difficulties there because like it relies a lot on gating via landscape, but when you're going to gate a player into a certain area or to a certain flow of movement with landscape, the landscape still has to be believable.
Mm.
And there was a whole thing about how none of this fucking makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Chris Larson has done some papers about Tolkien's grasp of astronomy, and I know a few other folks who've done papers on different aspects of botany and again geology and things like that. Which again, Tolkien was doing his best, and honestly, I'm kind of like I give him the hand wavy of it's magic, it's made up, it's fine.
An effort was made.
Yeah, an effort was made. It's fine.
There's a lot of good commentary and focus on that in Karen Wynne Fonstad's Atlas of Middle Earth as well,
Mm.
trying to grapple,
Mhm.
like trying to map parts of Middle Earth based on Tolkien's descriptions and grappling with but that's not how water
That's
works.
not how. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that people are able to go that deep and that we have people who are willing to commit that deeply to it in order to give the commentary and help us, make the best sense of it that we can. I think also one of the things that's really interesting for me with Lord of the Rings Online is how like it's a space that I am not particularly familiar with, but I've watched a lot of fans talk about their experience with this game in particular or some of the other games and the impact that these have on how people visualize characters, how they visualize how they speak or move or what spaces look like, I think it's easy to overlook the impact that some of the spaces where people are interacting with Middle Earth content, but are not necessarily spaces where everyone overlaps in that Venn diagram, what influence that has and what influence that has on future adaptations too, what people are expecting to see.
I will bring up Glorfindel exists in Lord of the Rings Online. And when you go near him, you get a hope buff. Like he like basically like glitters in the sunlight and you get hope when you're near him.
He's a Twilight vampire.
His skin's not sparkly, it's the air around him, but yeah.
More believable than Glitter Gandalf.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
I feel like there's a scale, a spectrum that can be developed about glitter believability in adaptational.
Yeah, does it run from wait, who's the least glitter and who's the most glitter? That's the what's the scale here?
Oh man. If you haven't given Lord of the Rings Online a chance and you are into forever games in that like you're never going to finish it, like you're never
Right.
going to 100% the game, you can play it forever and like get really embedded in it, and you have some time that you feel like dropping into it. It's such a good game. It's very faithful to the lore if that is something that is important to you. And it was made in 2007. It's been updated a few times, but not in a way that you
Right.
can't run it on an old ass computer. Not super Mac friendly, which is a problem for me. Like if you are running
Yeah.
Mac, you have to dual boot into Windows because they no longer support Mac at all. But it's so worth
Yeah.
playing. And like the sheer scale of Middle Earth that they have adapted is incredible. Like you go all the way from Ered Luin all the way to the Iron Hills as far as east and west. And you go
Yeah.
from Angmar all the way to Umbar.
Oh wow.
Like
Yeah.
it's basically the entire map that is at
Yeah.
your fingertips. It's incredible. It's so immersive. It's so fun. Slightly less immersive.
Still fun.
Yeah, let's skip ahead to the Lego games. Lego Lord of the Rings and
Okay.
Lego Hobbit were released in 2012 and 2014. The Lego games were based on the movies. The Lego Hobbit game was never actually completed.
Oh, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, it is incredibly
Oh, no.
frustrating. It was supposed to be completed in a
DLC.
DLC. Yes, thank you.
It was really interesting
Oh.
because what happened was the game was in development when they made the decision to switch from doing 2 movies versus 3 movies.
Yeah.
And so the Lego Hobbit movie actually came out before the second movie did, but it actually covers halfway
Both of
through the
those.
second movie.
Oh
And
wow.
so
Okay.
you actually could figure out some things that were going to happen in the second movie based on the Lego Hobbit game.
Yeah, but the movies didn't do as well as they thought they were going to, and the game didn't do as well as they thought it was going to, so they abandoned development. So we never got that DLC,
Womp womp.
which really
Yeah, so we never got to do
sucks.
Smaug and everything in the,
Yeah.
the
Aw, man.
Lego universe. But still very
Yeah, that's a
fun and a
shame.
lot of fun. They're really fun co-op games too.
Yeah.
So if you have like another person you like to play with, they're very fun like couch co-op games.
And they're interesting in terms of the scale of those games, because like when we were talking about Lotro and how huge it is and like how long it potentially takes to get from place to place, like as a Lego game, no one wants that. You want to be able to go because Lego is open world but staged, whereas Lotro is just open world. So you want to get to each stage as quickly as possible. So like the adaptational decisions they make regarding the landscape and like how the player is gated between these stages is very interesting. As in your Lego minifig you're playing as like a third of the height of a mountain and things like that.
Sure.
And also the source of the Disco File song.
It is the source of the Disco File song, which is a fucking banger.
You don't know it. Google the Disco File song. It is amazing.
Indeed.
The remix of some great sound bites from the Jackson movies.
It will make you not be able to hear Theoden's speech the same way ever again, so warning for that.
I mean, they're taking the hobbits to Isengard, so it ruined that thing for me. So,
Oh my god,
it's all good.
watching the Two Towers in concert when they got to that part and like everyone in the audience just started laughing. So good.
Amazing.
But yeah, the last like kind of adaptation that's been done is the Lord of the Rings Gollum. It came out in 2023, widely panned.
Bombed.
It
To put
bombed
it kindly.
very
To put
badly.
it kindly, yeah.
It was an interesting choice of an adaptation, though, and not one that you often see. It follows Gollum during the events of the Lord of the Rings, so it's kind of an oblique adaptation of Lord of the Rings. But yeah, beset with troubles. Gameplay was not great.
No, very glitchy.
Yeah, very glitchy. Gollum didn't obey the laws of physics.
Oh boy.
It's a shame it flopped because that studio had like a pretty decent deal to put out a few games, and it doesn't exist anymore. The studio shuttered. This game killed the studio that made it.
Oh man. Yeah.
Yeah. That's it for like actual 100% we're telling the story adaptations, but there are a number of like kind of like real-time strategy games that are based on Lord of the Rings that they are adapting parts of it. Essentially, they're adapting like battles and like kind of a scenario based situation. And those include Lord of the Rings, The Battle for Middle-earth, Lord of the Rings, The Battle for Middle-earth 2. And this is the Guinness World Record for the longest name of a video game. The Lord of the Rings, The Battle for Middle-earth 2, The Rise of the Witch King.
Electric Boogaloo,
Indeed.
man. Yeah.
Those came
Wow.
out in 2004, 5, and 6. There was also the Lord of the Rings, The War of the Ring, which came out in 2003, Lord of the Rings Tactics, which 2009, and the Lord of the Rings Conquest that came out in 2009.
Who named Tactics? Like, get out of here, man.
Yeah.
Like,
Definitely the most important and Tolkienian part of the Lord of the Rings is the tactics.
I know,
The
right?
tactics. It's like naming it's naming your video game like appendices. Like, what? What are you talking about?
If from my understanding, the Battle for Middle-earth 2 is the most lore appropriate of all of these games. The rest of them kind of play fast and loose with it. I have not played any of these games because that is not a genre I genuinely like to play.
Super valid.
Yeah, I was really surprised when we were like going through this how far back like the video game adaptations actually went. Like I never would have expected there to be video game adaptations that are older than me. Like that's crazy.
Yeah, I was gonna say like and a mud that's been going on for almost as long as I've been alive. Like, good lord.
Yeah. So, moving into the realm of comics, we are going to turn to our comics correspondent, Tim.
Yeah, Tim, what do you want to say about these comics?
Which is unfortunate because I have not actually read any of these. But there was a 15-part visual serial in Princess and Girl magazine. Maybe not I don't know, maybe it is the target audience for Tolkien, but I doubt in the
Maybe.
60s that really felt like the right
I need
target
to
audience.
find this magazine. That sounds like Princess and Girl. I'm like, that sounds like
It's a
that sounds like
UK magazine,
Oh, okay.
Okay.
and it's adapting The Hobbit,
Okay.
and it's incredibly expensive. Like
Aw,
the
okay.
collector's market for it is very high because it's very hard to get like a full serial
Aw.
run of it. Like it's
Ew.
not gonna run you first edition Hobbit prices, but it's gonna run you more than
Yeah.
$1,000.
Has any good comrade archived that on the Internet Archive?
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
That was from 1964 to 1965. Then Lord of the Rings was adapted from 1979 to 1981 by Luis Bermejo. It was only published in Europe because of a copyright issue in the US, so there was no English version, but it was based on the Bakshi films. And probably the best known, which I have seen a fair amount of the art from, but have not read cover to cover, is the 1989 Hobbit adaptation written by Dixon, and the artist is David Wenzel. And I really do like the art in that. The art is very whimsical. David Wenzel's style is very nice, and we have a little bit of his art in
David
that.
Wenzel, also just such a nice dude.
Yeah, he was a guest at DragonCon 2018, 2019, something like that, sometime in the
very
before
cool.
times. And yeah, we met him, and Alicia bought a print and had him, and he was doing little custom drawings on each of the prints that you bought as well.
And he asked
Aw.
me
Oh,
what my
cool.
initial was, and he made Gandalf scratching my initial onto Bilbo's door. It was very cute.
Oh,
Aw.
that's cool. I will say I have read this one, and it is lovely. Like, I have no beefs with it in particular or anything, and it's just very enjoyable to read and just see things in a visual format that's like graphic novel comics based.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will bring up the Lord of the Rings 79 to 81. That's the only official comic adaptation of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was published in Italian, German, Finnish. One of them was in Bulgarian. It was in a bunch of different languages, but never made it to English.
Wow.
It's an interesting array of
Yeah.
spaces for publication and sort of like how a lot of those spaces are perceiving Tolkien himself now. Or whatever. Interesting food for thought.
In my defense, I pretty much only read superhero comics, and I'm not a big fan of comics that have been adapted from literary works in general.
And there's not a lot of them here. It's not a super popular space. We did also talk about if we were going to talk about audiobook adaptations here, and we decided we weren't really going to go into those. There are several different ones, the most recent ones being the ones where Andy Serkis has narrated those. But despite not spending a lot of time on these, we do want to recognize like audiobook, and it is also a particular form of adaptation, especially given what you can do with production values and everything in order to create that soundscape or what have you. We're going to very briefly talk about some adaptations that never quite made it to market. So these early attempts in adaptation that never made it to actual screen time or whatever, it's just interesting to take a look at who were some of the interested parties who were trying to do adaptations. One fascinating one is Walt Disney. There were 3 different attempts within Disney to do some Tolkien adaptations, one in 1938, one throughout the 1950s, and another in 1972.
Yeah, they had to fucking wait for him to die.
Tolkien not a fan of Disney.
Yeah, Tolkien actually he took umbrage with very specifically Disney's depiction of dwarves in Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. He coined the term Disneyfication for sanitizing of folktales. I can't imagine there was an amount of money that would have made him okay with this.
Yeah. These
Yeah.
were put into production in terms of like, we should theorize what we want to do and all that, but they were never greenlit. They never got to go ahead and actually turn these into actual products. I will mention the attempt by Forrest J. Ackerman, mostly because that is the Zimmerman script, which is very famous because Tolkien rips it to fucking shreds in Letter 210. And it's worth noting that a lot of the critiques that we hear from Tolkien about, I didn't like this was this, all of these concerns and complaints are about an adaptation that was never made. And so we get insights into his perspective and everything. But anytime someone on the internet is telling you that Tolkien hated whatever modern adaptation because Letter 210, like, they're extrapolating. They may be extrapolating correctly, but they are extrapolating. There was an attempt by United Artists in the 60s. Apple Films with the Beatles
Yeah.
went for this with the Beatles playing the 4 Hobbits.
If I recall correctly, that idea came from the Beatles, yeah?
Oh yes, yeah, they were big fans.
Didn't John want to play Gollum? Am I remembering that right? I feel like Lennon wanted to play Gollum. I might be remembering that wrong.
I'm not sure.
As we have seen, you can do more than one role.
Indeed.
I
Correct.
mean,
Gollum and
I mean, you could do Gollum and Mary or Pippin.
Yeah, exactly.
sure.
Gollum Frodo might be a little tough, but
Ooh, that would be inspired though. Like,
let me
Yeah.
not say that it can't be done. Many skilled actors have been able to play multiple versions of themselves in the same. Think of Orphan Black.
yeah. I was gonna say you can do it now.
Here's some directors that were looking at making adaptations that, again, never came to pass. Franco Zeffirelli, Jake Kasdan, Ridley Scott, George
Ridley
Lucas,
Scott?
Steven Spielberg had all at one point or another
George
expressed
Lucas?
interest.
I cannot
Wow.
imagine what a Ridley Scott version of Middle Earth
I
would have
can't
looked like.
either.
Yeah.
But George Lucas, I would have been intrigued by, considering Willow is a pretty impressive piece of fantasy.
Yeah.
That is actually where Willow comes from, I believe. When he wasn't allowed to do anything with Tolkien, he goes in a different direction, and that's what Willow evolves out of, is the desire
yeah.
to work in that sort of fictional space.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, so I want Ridley Scott to direct the David Carradine as Aragorn adaptation now.
The dark, gritty, like B-movie version of
Oh
Middle
my
Earth.
god, it'd be amazing.
Let's please pour one out for the Del Toro Hobbit we never got to see.
Oh yeah.
Even though it's sort of
Correct.
morphed into the Jackson Hobbit, I do
R.I.P.
definitely count that as a lost adaptation.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, particularly because a lot of the places where I feel frustration with that adaptation is where Del Toro's vision and Jackson's vision are at odds with each other, and you feel that
Mhm.
dissonance at times. So,
Mm.
I wanted the visuals. I wanted the visuals so bad.
Yeah. Same.
there's also one other category, which is definitely lower budget. These are fan films. But I think it's worth noting there are fan films out there that are incredibly well produced, incredibly thoughtfully made.
Better produced than some of the ones we talked about earlier.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of
These-
these had more money than Hobbit did, or
Yes.
They also very intentionally do follow the style set by the Jackson adaptations
To the best of their ability.
for all of these. Yeah. So the first one that I want to mention is The Hunt for Gollum, which is a fan film made in 2009. Please note that I said 2009 because as you're looking for articles about this or what have you, you're likely to find the announcements about a major, like big budget, Jackson attached, Andy Serkis attached adaptation coming from Warner Brothers. And there's a lot of, I think, genuine questions that can be raised in the space of like how Warner Brothers is going to treat this fan film and the steps they've already taken to try to eradicate it from the internet, which to the best of my knowledge at this point, the fan film folks have been fighting back against.
It's back up. They were able to get the website and the film back up, and I think Warner Brothers like backed off pretty quickly. I think when a lot of people were like, what the fuck are you doing?"
Right. I do want to point out that this is an award-winning fan film that was sanctioned by the estate.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of why they were able to like be like, back the fuck up, because we were here first, and also you're using our title, which
Well, it's Tolkien's
It's
title.
Tolkien's title.
I mean, it's sort of like, but I mean, it's like in terms of like copyright and rights and stuff like that. I feel like they have
There's
a
this argument
leg
from
to
Warner
stand on.
Brothers of, oh, this could hurt our brand. Our brand is this title. And it's like, the year is 2024. You chose that title in 2024, knowing full well that a fan film already existed.
Existed,
And
exactly.
you like, if there is a concern about your brand, you walked straight into it. And I think we should be critical of practices like that, because these are this fan film in particular is one that like, does not deserve to disappear from the internet. And I want to really reassure everyone, it like as long as you are watching it streaming, like that is 100% the fair use that is licensed. You are 100% cool to watch this. No moral qualms about like, oh, or is it infringement or whatever. No, like this is sanctioned by the estate, all of that.
Yeah, and it's really good. Like the orc costumes, not the best, but it's a fan film. Like you're not expecting it's better than like, Halloween store orc. It's not like, Warner Brothers money orc, but it is pretty good. And
Yeah.
it does exactly what you think it would do. It follows the story of Aragorn and Gandalf failing until
Which is kind of interesting, It's sort of like, I feel like it's like an interesting tangent to kind of go down where it's like, oh yeah, ultimately this storyline, it ends in failure, and how essential that failure is to the eventual success of the quest, I think is kind of interesting to think about too. But
Yeah.
I do kind of like the idea where it's like, oh yeah, Aragorn, he's been out here doing a lot of stuff, and sometimes he doesn't always get his quarry, I guess.
There's another fan film in a similar space in terms of like very good quality of production, especially for a fan film and all of that. And that's Born of Hope, which I believe is also 2009. And that one is looking at Arathorn, so Aragorn's father, and his mother, and like that story of his birth and early years and the people who are grown folks at that time in that story.
also very good.
Yeah. That is one I know that we've talked about. Like, it would be so interesting to see that film get the full budget that it would be like so beautifully deserved to have, to be able to tell the story in every way they'd like to, because it's so good already with the level of production that they were able to put forward. There's also another one that never came to fruition. It was being advertised, and like there were announcements that it was going to be made in like 2013 to 2014, and that was called Storm Over Gondolin, but that one was not ever made. And then there's a fan film in a slightly different sort of narrative space, a slightly different tone, and
That's the My Little Pony adaptation in the style of Friendship is Magic. That is 2012. The actual title of the video is Lord of the Rings reenacted by ponies. Rather than a ring, it is a golden horseshoe with the
Of
ring script
course.
on it. And it's very much like we're going to like defeat Sauron and destroy the ring or the horseshoe with the power of friendship kind of thing. And
Hell yeah.
we watched this at MythCon earlier this year, a couple months ago now, and I was very skeptical about it because I'm not a big pony person, but it was hilarious. I fully recommend it, especially the Ent, who is basically a pony wearing like a grade school tree costume.
It's so good.
It's so good. I mean, I like unironically, unabashedly love My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. So this is like so many things that I love all coming together. Yeah, this was a great adaptation, I think.
Like surprisingly faithful to the work as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
Being like a
exactly.
12-minute video,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I was mega impressed as a fan of both properties.
There is one more adaptation that we do want to just make a brief note about, and it sort of straddles the space between an unusual type of adaptation and a big budget adaptation, because it's very definitely a major studio, big budget adaptation. And that is that we are getting War of the Rohirrim in December. And that is produced by Warner Brothers and everything. It's the story of Rohan, like 500 years before the events of Lord of the Rings. So it's a third age story, drawing information from the appendices and things like that. And it's done in a anime style. It's an animated film, feature-length film coming to theaters with big budget backing. And it's a very, very interesting space that we actually get something like this. It's an interesting time to be able to go and see an adaptation like this.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have like a modern animated adaptation. I'm famously kind of an anime hater because I went to art school and like basically everyone's heard the story about how all my friends tried to force me to watch Cowboy Bebop and therefore I hate anime. Uh, so like there are definitely like some tropes to like anime like animation that are not necessarily my favorite that I am definitely kind of seeing in the previews for this adaptation, but I am so compelled. I have to see this. Like it seems like such a weird but potentially good adaptation.
Yes, I'm very encouraged. We have Miranda Otto coming back as the voice of Eowyn or as a narrator in this, taking us back to the context and events. I'm encouraged by folks that I've heard of who have been consulting on this film. I've been encouraged by a lot of the things that I've heard and wary of many of the things as well because, I'm not a huge anime fan either. I struggle with animated things in general. And I did not realize how excited I was for this until we went to go see Beetlejuice. And the seats are all those sort of like dream lounger, like reclining armchair seats. And this trailer came up. And as soon as the first note dropped, I was just like not in control of my body, flailing my legs so hard that my flip flops flew off. And like the guy that I was sitting next to was like, "Are you excited about this one?" Like, "I guess I am."
That's so cute.
Yeah, I 100% started crying. I also saw this
Aw.
at Beetlejuice, and like, because they started with the fucking Rohan theme, and I'm like, oh god, no, not the Rohan theme. And then it's
So
shots from
cool.
the movies. There's like Aragorn doing the sluttiest thing a man can do, and then like it cuts to the animation, and the Rohan theme fucking gets me, man. And I'm like
Yeah.
sitting there because we're there to watch a comedy, and I'm like, you can't fucking cry. Don't let those tears fall. You're not gonna be the nerd crying about a fucking preview.
Yeah, I wouldn't say like I'm a super hardcore anime fan, but I've probably watched a lot more anime than anybody here, and I've enjoyed a lot of it. And I'm also really like animation in general, so I'm pumped. I've been pumped, and I continue to be pumped. So yeah, that's kind of all I have to say.
The director, I'm not a big anime person either, but my understanding is the director has some level of renown as well. It's
Yeah,
Kenji
he does.
Kamiyama, and
Yeah,
he, just looking back at his experience, has worked on stuff back to like 80s DuckTales,
yeah,
Akira, Kiki's Delivery Service as
Yeah.
like
he's
artists, like
legit.
doing artists
Yeah,
back
he's
at those in
legit.
those days. So he's been around for like 30 plus years doing actual like the actual drawing, and then moved into directing, and has since directed a bunch of Ghost in the Shell animes,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
biggest thing that he's been involved in. But
At,
yeah, he's legit.
at Dragon Con, we had like a 30-minute Dragon Con exclusive interview with the producer,
yeah, Jason
Ooh.
DeMarco.
and everything I heard makes me feel really good about what they're trying to do. Everything
Awesome.
that I've heard from all the people I know who are consulting on this also makes me feel good about what it is they're trying to do.
Mhm.
Very cool.
Also, I don't know, have you guys seen the Japanese preview or just the English one?
Just the English one.
So,
Uh,
in the Japanese preview, you see Saruman, and it's
Ooh.
Christopher Lee.
that's cool.
Yeah.
Oh shit! What?
They got specific permission from the estate to use
From his
from
widow.
Christopher
They got
Lee's,
permission from his
Christopher Lee's wife,
widow.
to use his image, his visage in the animation.
Oh
Because she
wow,
was like, "Oh yes, he would love this."
Yeah.
We don't know who's voicing him yet, but yeah, I thought that was really cool.
that's incredible. Oh yeah, that's awesome.
Also, the Japanese version of the preview very different.
Oh yeah,
It's worth watching.
I'll have to look it
This
up.
is also why, like, I'm just going to get on a soapbox here about AI. Like when we have technology to be able to use someone's voice or visage or whatever, and when they've passed, it makes such a difference to me if their loved ones have been able to consent to that instead of a studio saying like, oh, we own this so we can just do what we want. I think it's also very important to note that even as we went back through all of these different adaptations that are out there, you will also see on the internet, for instance, stills from the 1929 black and white Hobbit film.
Which predates
We'll
The
point out that
Hobbit.
The Hobbit was written in 1937. And in 1929, it did not exist, nor was it a published book, nor had it been made into a film. These are AI generated images that go around and that people that they're trying to dupe people and get clicks and everything, and just hoping that people aren't noticing those dates, that it seems close enough, memorable enough because they remember a couple big movies that came out in like 1929 or whatever. So the kitten is fine.
Oh,
She
that's
managed to
great.
take down both brass horse bookends.
She's trying to ride the
Frankly
horse.
impressive.
Aww.
Apparently, like she wants to be in War of the Rohirrim too, I guess.
Aww.
She's a shield maiden.
Anyway, people who are making up AI nonsense are shit, and we have to continue like fighting back against it.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad that there are ethical ways in order to go about keeping some of the ways of honoring actors and the work that folks are doing alive in film and television and everything still. I will say also, most of my qualms that I had had about War of the Rohirrim have been mitigated because all of my qualms were about upper level management at Warner Brothers.
Mm.
And I do have a sense that the folks behind this film have been trying, much like Jackson did, much like others have done, to try to make sure that the people who are way at the top with whatever their political conservative nonsense is are not getting to control the storyline of the piece.
Yeah.
I am hopeful that David Zaslav has not been able to fuck this one up. That's the TLDR, in my opinion.
Knock on wood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Inshallah, pretty much.
So, really, the entire reason that we wanted to look at adaptations outside of these big budget ones is that the more adaptations there are, the more people they reach, the less definitive any single adaptation is, the more versions we see of a way to tell a story, the more people get intrigued and curious and keep coming back to the source material. And so, my personal view is that there's no such thing as a bad adaptation in terms of it being bad for the source material. Whether any particular adaptation succeeds or not in any particular viewer's eye, the more of them we have, the more attention keeps coming back to the source material and to the story.
I would just like to add that no matter how many people cry about it on the internet, none of these adaptations, whether you love them or hate them, have ever changed a single word on the page.
Correct.
Those books are still there. You can go back to them and enjoy them. Enjoy the adaptations you like, leave the ones behind you don't. Enjoy the parts of the adaptations that you like and just ignore the ones you don't, or make fun of the ones you don't, whatever. But just don't be a dick about it. And every adaptation is probably somebody's favorite.
100%. Amen. Amen to all that. I just have a really quick mathem, basically, or a bookmark or something. So I mentioned a while back in the podcast that Claire Moore and I were developing a note in response to a how do I put this delicately? a
A fascinating
a
take.
fascinating take on the women in Lord of the Rings that was published by Mythlore. I'm really excited to say that our note is actually going to be published in the next Mythlore, which should be out by the time that this episode, I think, is edited and up. So yeah, I'm blushing and excited because this is a note and this is the first time I've been published in something. And I'm super excited that I got to do it with Claire. And our note is entitled A Bleak, Barren Take, a response to women and fertility in the Lord of the Rings. And I
Fuck
am
yeah.
so pleased to see that in the table of contents that Janet put out, we are above Verlin Flieger's note. And I'm like, oh, the 6 degrees from Verlin Flieger has just narrowed by that much. I am in a table of contents with her now. So so look out for that. And I don't know. I'm excited about it. And
I just want to say
yeah.
how excited I am about it because
Yeah.
I have recently a friend sent me, like, knowing that I do the podcast, knowing that I'm a Tolkien nerd, sent me a more sort of like pop culture article that really seemed to be taking the same sort of, oh, Middle Earth is barren and there's like no women and no whatever.
There's no
And
babies. Yeah.
just this bizarre take. It was like, wow, having read the article that your note is responding to and very much feeling that it needs the response, I see that this pop culture article seems to be drawing from things that are in that article. And I think it's very, very important that there is the space to counter that narrative before it gains a lot of steam. And so that when it's encountered, there is the response to it and people can view it in context.
Yeah. I'm excited. I was jokingly referring it to as our very demure, very mindful response that was basically trying to say, "Do you even read, you misogynist creep?" in a much more in a much more delicate way. Or
Yeah.
diplomatic way, maybe.
Yeah, if you want to check that out, Mythlore is open access. I will have a link to it when it goes live in the resources tab on our webpage. But also, if you want to read it in its full context, you can get a digital or print subscription to Mythlore at mythsock.org.
Yay.
I personally love having physical copies
Same.
of things in my grubby little hands, and I am super excited to be about to have a physical copy of something that Leah has published on my
Aw.
bookshelves alongside of physical things that Alicia has published. And so this is a fun little part of my library that's growing, and I'm very excited about it. And
Yay.
so many amazing folks that we've interviewed on the podcast too. Like I'm just getting to put together this whole physical little library of tangible pieces of amazing work in the Tolkien space. And I'm very excited about that.
So cool.
All right. And that does it for our first episode on adaptations and the smaller adaptations, the lesser known ones. And we oh fuck, I don't know what to say. Alicia, take over.
We've been recording for a while, guys.
Leave that in. Don't edit that
Good
out.
luck salvaging that one, editing team.
Don't salvage it. Just leave it in.
Just
it.
fucking leave
Leave it
that
in.
one. Oh,
I love it.
God. Yeah, thank you for joining us today. You can find us basically wherever you stream your podcast. We're on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music. You can also stream us directly on Zencaster. That's zencaster.com/Queer Lodgings, a Tolkien podcast with a whole bunch of hyphens in between all of those words. Please leave us a rating, like, share, and subscribe where it is possible to do so. You can find us on Facebook at Queer Lodgings, Twitter at queer_lodgings. We're also on Blue Sky as Queer Lodgings. You can also send us an email if you have feedback or ideas for future episodes at queerlodgingspodcast@gmail.com. Also, guys, we have a website, which is queerlodgings.com,
Yay.
where we post all of our episodes, put all of our resources, and we also have a merch shop.
Merch.
It is full of fantastic things, such as holographic stickers that say #fueled by spite.
It gives me so much joy to see those in the wild.
Amazing.
Hope to see you guys there.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Later.
Here, hold on a second. Hold on one second. Let me double check that my rabbits aren't like destroying my bedroom because I'm hearing a lot of I'm hearing a lot of stuff going on in here.
Please.
So hang on one second.
Yeah.